Hey guys, today we're stepping into the life of a man whose name alone has become a symbol, Barack Obama. Picture this: the Pacific sun shining over the island of Oahu, a boy with a curious gaze wandering under palm trees, carrying a name that didn't quite fit in, and a story that hadn't yet begun. The air smells like ocean salt and dry hibiscus leaves, but behind that beautiful island life, there's something deeper brewing. A kid between worlds, between races, between dreams and the hard edge of reality. It's not just a story about a president. It's about where you begin when no one knows what you're destined to become. Oh, and you probably won't survive this emotional roller coaster if you think politics is just about elections. This is about what it costs to change your life, and maybe the world. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, hit the comments and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. I always love seeing how far this story travels. Let's go. Barack Obama was born on August 4th, 1961, in Honolulu, Hawaii. His birth certificate would one day be the center of controversy, but at the time, it was just a start. Barack Hussein Obama II, named after a father he would barely know. His mother, Ann Dunham, was a white woman from Kansas. His father, Barack Obama Sr., a black man from Kenya, came to study in the U.S. before eventually returning to Africa. Their love was real but brief. When Barack was only 2, his father left. He wouldn't see him again until a short, awkward visit nearly a decade later. Obama grew up mostly with his grandparents, Stanley and Madeline Dunham, middle-class folks who worked hard and lived simply. They gave him stability, but not always answers. In school, he was Barry, a quiet kid, smart but unsure, the only black child in many of his classes. He wrote later about feeling like a spectator in his own life, not quite belonging, always watching. Hawaii was paradise, but Barack struggled with identity. He would stare into mirrors and wonder what it meant to be black. He read Malcolm X, James Baldwin, and other writers trying to make sense of himself. He experimented, some weed, a little drinking, even slipping academically. Not out of rebellion, but confusion. He once called it his interior struggle. He was chasing something, maybe the father he never knew, or maybe the person he hoped to become. His mother, Anne, tried to fill the gaps. She was fiercely intelligent, full of hope, and endlessly idealistic. She remarried, and the family moved briefly to Indonesia, where Barack went to school, learned to eat exotic foods, and saw poverty up close. He came back to Hawaii older than his years. By high school, he had the cool demeanor that people would one day recognize on the world stage. Calm, collected, quiet, but watching everything. At Punahou School, a prestigious private school in Honolulu, he learned how to live in 2 worlds. He played basketball, made friends across races, but often felt like an outsider. His teachers saw flashes of brilliance, but also a kid who held back. He wasn't trying to be impressive. He was trying to survive himself. College would crack things open. He started at Occidental College in Los Angeles, then transferred to Columbia University in New York. There, something shifted. He dove into books, politics, race, history. He still felt the absence of his father, who had died in a car crash in Kenya in 1982. That loss hit hard. It wasn't just about missing a person. It was missing a chance to finally understand where he came from. In New York, he lived like a monk. Tight budget, small apartment, long walks. He began to write. He took notes on what it meant to live between lines of race and class. People didn't always remember him from that time. He was low profile, but inside, Barack was building, quietly, carefully. After graduating from Columbia, he worked for a while, first at a business job he hated, then as a community organizer in Chicago. That's where the next chapter truly began, but more on that in the next section. For now, picture a young man standing alone in the middle of two oceans, one that brought him from Africa and Kansas to Hawaii, and one that was pulling him toward something unknown. Barack didn't have it all figured out, but he knew he couldn't stay still. He was ready to move. Section 2. Chicago was cold, wind slicing through alleys, snow crunching under tired boots, buildings towering like judgment. But for Barack Obama, it felt like purpose. He arrived in the mid-1980s, a 20-something with a degree from Columbia and a mind full of big ideas. He wasn't chasing money or status. He was chasing impact. The job wasn't glamorous. Community organizer for a South Side church-based group working in poor neighborhoods, places where factories had closed, schools were falling apart, and trust in government had all but vanished. Most folks didn't know what a community organizer even did. Honestly, sometimes Barack didn't either. But he learned fast. He walked the streets, knocked on doors, sat in tiny church basements with old women who had seen too much pain and young men who had already given up. He listened more than he talked. He wasn't there to fix people. He was there to understand them. That humility stuck with him. In one project, he tried to help residents pressure the city to remove asbestos from a public housing project. Meetings dragged on. Promises got made, then broken. People got frustrated. Barack got frustrated. But through it all, he kept showing up. That became his thing. Just keep showing up. Chicago toughened him. The city didn't care that he had gone to Columbia. It cared whether you kept your word, whether you stood your ground, whether you were real. Barack started to get it. He began to understand politics not as a game of power, but as a test of patience and persistence. But he still didn't feel fully rooted. His name, his background, his mixed-race identity, they followed him like shadows. Some folks didn't trust him. Others didn't quite know where to place him. He wasn't quite black enough for some, not white enough for others. And in the neighborhood, he wasn't from there. That mattered. Still, something inside him clicked. He realized that real change came from the ground up, not top down. That the problems of poverty and injustice weren't distant ideas, they were personal, and that laws weren't just pieces of paper. They were about whether your kid got a decent teacher, whether your streetlight worked, whether someone listened when you spoke. In those years, Barack also got his first real taste of what it meant to lead. Not from behind a podium, but in living rooms, late nights, with people who were tired of being ignored. They didn't need a savior. They needed someone who could sit beside them and say, "Let's figure this out together." He learned about strategy, about compromise. He saw how faith communities organized when government failed them. He witnessed how racism wasn't just in slurs, it was in zoning laws, bank loans, and broken promises. And slowly, through all of it, he began to shape his voice. Not long after, he made a decision that would change everything: law school. But before heading off to Harvard, Barack took a trip to Kenya. He wanted to walk where his father had walked. He met relatives who spoke a different language but shared the same blood. He stood at his father's grave. It was a strange peace, bittersweet. There was no closure, but there was clarity. He came back changed, a little more grounded, a little more ready. Harvard would come next, and Michelle, and the spotlight. But those dusty church basements in Chicago, those tough conversations, those tired smiles, those long losing fights, that's where Barack Obama first learned what leadership really meant. And even though most of the world hadn't noticed yet, something had begun. The kid from Hawaii was turning into something else. Harvard Law School wasn't exactly a quiet place. It was filled with sharp minds, sharper tongues, and students ready to argue anything for the sake of everything. When Barack Obama walked through its doors in 1988, he didn't come in loud, but that didn't mean he wouldn't be heard. He had spent 3 years in the real world, organizing, listening, learning in Chicago. Most of his classmates had come straight from college. Barack brought something heavier. He didn't talk much in his first semester. He observed, took notes, tried to figure out where he fit in a room filled with ambition. It didn't take long for people to notice him. He was calm when debates got heated, thoughtful when people got lost in theory. He could argue with grace and make hard ideas sound human. He didn't dominate conversations, but when he spoke, others leaned in. In 1990, he made history. He was elected the first black president of the Harvard Law Review, one of the most prestigious legal journals in the world. The media rushed in. Cameras, articles, pressure. Obama handled it the same way he handled almost everything. Head high, words careful, never too impressed with himself. He knew what it meant, but he didn't let it define him. Meanwhile, something else was about to shift. During a summer back in Chicago, Barack got an internship at a top law firm. That's where he met Michelle Robinson. She was his mentor, sharp, stylish, and already making waves as a young black lawyer. Barack was instantly interested. Michelle? Not so much, at least at first. She thought dating a colleague was a bad idea. He thought she was amazing. He wore her down with charm, intelligence, and an ice cream date that turned into something real. Michelle grounded Barack. She had grown up on the South Side in a close-knit working-class family. She had climbed every ladder with grit and grace. She didn't fall for big speeches. She fell for character. Their love wasn't flashy. It was steady, real. They pushed each other, called each other out. They shared a sense of duty, a quiet seriousness about making things better, not just for themselves, but for others. After graduating, Barack returned to Chicago again, this time with a new level of confidence and education. He could have gone anywhere, big firm, big paycheck, but he chose something different. He worked on voting rights cases, taught constitutional law, and started getting involved in local politics. The South Side still mattered to him. He wasn't just visiting anymore. He and Michelle got married in 1992. They settled down in a modest apartment and tried to live the values they both believed in: community, service, and integrity. But Barack was restless. He started writing a book, Dreams from My Father. It was personal, almost painfully so. A journey through his past, his father's absence, his struggle with identity. It wasn't political, it was raw, and it showed the world that behind the calm voice was a man still trying to piece himself together. The book didn't make him famous, but it showed what he was made of. Honest words, vulnerable thoughts, and a refusal to pretend he had all the answers. At the same time, he started testing the political waters. In 1996, he won a seat in the Illinois State Senate. It wasn't glamorous. He had to learn the system, the endless negotiations, the slow grind of passing bills, the egos and alliances. But he showed up. He studied. He worked across the aisle. He didn't scream. He strategized. People began to whisper. There's something about this guy. He's not like the others. But politics wasn't easy on his marriage. Long hours. Constant pressure. Michelle wasn't thrilled about the life it brought. Barack missed dinners, sometimes days. They argued. They went to marriage counseling. They didn't pretend everything was perfect. But they fought for each other. They also became parents. Malia and Sasha changed the rhythm of Barack's life. Fatherhood made things sharper, more urgent. He wasn't just building a better world for his community, he was building it for his daughters. Through it all, Michelle was a rock, but not a silent one. She challenged him, reminded him to stay human. And Barack listened. Law, love, and the early days of political life didn't give him easy answers. But they gave him something better, a foundation, a steady, complex, deeply personal sense of why any of it mattered. It wasn't about being famous. It wasn't even about being president. Not yet. It was about staying true to the story he was still learning how to tell. Politics doesn't always reward the calm voice. It tends to favor the loud, the flashy, the ruthless. But Barack Obama didn't change who he was to fit that mold. He changed the mold to fit who he was. Slowly, the country began to notice. As a state senator in Illinois, he wasn't storming the headlines, but he was building a reputation. He focused on ethics reform, health care access, and police accountability, issues that actually mattered to everyday people. He didn't crave the cameras. He craved impact. Still, the Illinois State Senate could be frustrating. Partisanship was thick. Change moved like syrup, but Barack stayed steady. He listened more than he spoke, drafted smart bills, and worked quietly to win support from both sides. Colleagues started to respect him, not just because of how he spoke, but because of how he listened. In 2000, he took a big swing. He ran for Congress. The seat was held by Bobby Rush, a former Black Panther and a strong voice in Chicago politics. Barack thought he could offer something different, something modern, unifying, thoughtful, but voters weren't convinced. He lost, badly. The race was bruising, and the defeat cut deep. That loss humbled him. For a while, he wondered if politics was really for him. His marriage strained under the pressure again. Michelle was tired of the late nights, the financial stress, the constant fight to balance everything. Barack looked in the mirror and asked himself the hard question, is this worth it? Then something shifted. In 2002, a U.S. Senate seat in Illinois opened up. It was a long shot, a real long shot. He was still a relatively unknown state senator with a funny name, a small network, and no national backing. But he had something else, a powerful voice, a clear message, and the lessons of failure. He ran. And this time, something clicked. His campaign didn't have much money, but it had heart. He talked about unity, decency, and the promise of America. Crowds started to grow. People leaned in, drawn to the calm, thoughtful man who didn't shout but spoke like he meant every word. Then came the 2004 Democratic National Convention. Barack was invited to give the keynote address. Most of America had never heard of him. He was a name buried deep on the speaker list. But on that stage, under those lights, something happened. He started with, "Tonight is a particular honor for me because, let's face it, my presence on this stage is pretty unlikely." And just like that, a country paused. The speech was electric, but quiet, poetic, but clear. He spoke of hope, of hard work, of how there's not a liberal America and a conservative America. There's the United States of America. He didn't pander. He didn't preach. He connected. The room exploded. Viewers at home lit up. Pundits called it the arrival of a star. But it wasn't just style. It was substance. Barack had taken everything he'd lived, race, class, faith, doubt, pain, and wrapped it into a vision people wanted to believe in. That speech didn't just change how people saw him, it changed how he saw himself. For the first time, he believed the presidency wasn't just a dream, it was possible. In November 2004, he won the U.S. Senate seat in a landslide, over 70% of the vote. Suddenly, the kid from Hawaii, the organizer from Chicago, the law professor with a funny name, was a U.S. senator. Washington took notice. Some were impressed, others were suspicious. Was he real? Could he play the game? Was he too naive? Barack didn't rush to answer. He took his seat in the Senate and stayed mostly quiet at first. He didn't jump into every news cycle. He studied, learned, spoke when it mattered. He also published his second book, The Audacity of Hope. It laid out his political philosophy, bridging divides, restoring dignity, and renewing America's promise. The title came from a sermon by Jeremiah Wright, his longtime pastor. The words weren't just poetic, they were personal. Audacity, hope. Together, they would become his armor. As 2007 began, the buzz was growing. Could he run for president? Should he? The country was still raw from September 11th, mired in 2 wars and struggling under deep political division. Many thought it wasn't his time, but Barack quietly thought, maybe it is. Michelle wasn't sure. She worried about the toll it would take on him, on the girls, and on their family. They talked about it for months. She didn't want to lose him to politics. He promised he would stay grounded, be the same man. So, on a cold day in Springfield, Illinois, the same place Lincoln once launched his political career, Barack stood outside the old state capitol and announced his candidacy for President of the United States. The crowd was wrapped in coats, breath visible in the February air. He stood tall and said, "I recognize there is a certain presumptuousness in this, a certain audacity to this announcement." But by then, everyone knew that audacity had a name, and it was Barack Obama. The 2008 campaign didn't start with fireworks. It started with doubt. Barack Obama was too new, too unknown, too untested, or so the critics said. He was running against Hillary Clinton, one of the most recognized names in American politics, with decades of experience and deep political roots. And Barack, he had been in the U.S. Senate for just over 2 years. But there was something happening underneath the surface that couldn't be measured in years or titles. From the start, Obama's campaign was different. It didn't rely on the usual machinery. It was powered by energy, technology, and people who were ready for something new. College students, single moms, lifelong skeptics, even some Republicans, people started showing up, not just to listen, but to work. To knock doors, make calls, donate $5 when they could. They weren't just supporting a candidate, they were building a movement. He didn't promise easy answers, but he promised something bigger. Hope. And people were hungry for it. Still, the road was brutal. The media picked him apart. Was he too polished, too dreamy? Was he really tough enough to run a country? Every word was scrutinized. Every slip made headlines. Then there were the personal attacks. People called him a foreigner, a Muslim, an outsider. His middle name, Hussein, was turned into a weapon. And still, Barack kept his cool. That calm under pressure became one of his greatest strengths. When people tried to bait him, he responded with patience. When opponents shouted, he listened, waited, then spoke with precision. He wasn't playing their game. He was rewriting the rules. But Hillary Clinton was no easy opponent. She had strong support from party leaders, powerful donors, and a deep knowledge of the system. She won early states. She debated fiercely. She knew how to campaign hard, and she wasn't going to back down. Then came Iowa. In January 2008, Obama won the Iowa caucus, a mostly white rural state where he wasn't supposed to stand a chance. That win changed everything. Suddenly, his candidacy wasn't just symbolic, it was real. It was working, it was winning. Crowds grew, donations poured in. His message, "Yes, we can," echoed in gymnasiums and stadiums, whispered in classrooms and kitchen tables. He wasn't just a politician. He had become a voice people needed to hear. Still, the race dragged on. Hillary fought with everything she had. Primary after primary, state after state, the two battled in a tight race that kept the country on edge. At times it got tense. The media stoked division. Words were twisted. Allies clashed. But through it all, Barack refused to demonize Hillary. He stayed respectful, even when it wasn't easy. In June 2008, after a long and often exhausting fight, Hillary suspended her campaign. Barack Obama had secured the Democratic nomination. It was historic. He was the first black nominee of a major party in American history. People cried, danced, fell silent in awe. But there wasn't time to rest. The general election was just beginning. His opponent, Senator John McCain, a war hero, a straight shooter, a man with decades of experience. McCain was respected, even by many Democrats, and he wasn't to be underestimated. The campaign heated up fast. McCain chose Sarah Palin as his running mate, a move that shook up the race and grabbed headlines. The economy started to crack. Banks failed. Markets panicked. Fear swept across the country. Obama faced a critical test. In moments of chaos, voters look for calm. He stepped up. He spoke clearly about the crisis, offered plans, met with experts. And while McCain seemed to fumble during key moments, suspending his campaign, offering mixed messages, Obama stood steady. People started to trust him, not just like him, but trust him. Then came the speech that would define the campaign. In Philadelphia, March 2008, in response to controversy surrounding his former pastor, Reverend Jeremiah Wright, Obama gave a speech on race in America. He didn't dodge. He didn't deny. He addressed the pain and the progress, the rage and the hope. He said, "We the people, in order to form a more perfect union," and reminded the country that the story of America was always one of struggle and possibility. It was honest, bold, and unforgettable. By the time November came, the tide had turned. People stood in line for hours to vote. Some brought lawn chairs, others brought their children. Many had never voted before in their lives. On November 4th, 2008, it happened. Barack Obama was elected the 44th President of the United States. In Grant Park, Chicago, thousands gathered. Tears fell. Strangers hugged. Families called loved ones across time zones and continents. On that stage, with Michelle by his side and his daughters in his arms, Barack spoke the words that echoed through history. If there is anyone out there who still doubts that America is a place where all things are possible, tonight is your answer. It wasn't just his victory. It was a moment that belonged to everyone who ever believed the world could be better than it was. But the real test, the hardest part, was still ahead, because hope can win elections. But governing? That takes something more. The morning after the election, the weight hit hard. Barack Obama was now the president-elect. The world had watched, celebrated, cried. But beneath the headlines and the cheering crowds, A reality waited that didn't care how historic his win had been. The United States was in crisis. The economy was collapsing. Banks were failing. The auto industry was on life support. Millions were losing their jobs and homes. The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan were dragging on. People weren't just anxious, they were terrified. And now, this calm, thoughtful man, this newcomer, was supposed to fix it all. In January 2009, Barack took the oath of office on a freezing Washington morning. The crowd stretched for miles, packed in the cold, standing shoulder to shoulder, some holding babies, some holding flags, some just standing there in silent awe. The moment was breathtaking. A black man sworn in as president of a country built in part on slavery. The impossible had happened. But as soon as the celebration ended, the grind began. Obama inherited one of the most broken economies in American history. The first order of business: stop the bleeding. He worked with Congress to pass the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, a $787 billion stimulus package aimed at saving and creating jobs, bailing out industries, and pumping money into schools, roads, and clean energy. It was massive, controversial, risky. Some thought it wasn't enough, others thought it was too much. Republicans mostly voted against it, but Barack pushed it through anyway. Quietly, it began to work. The freefall slowed. Jobs came back, slowly, but Americans were impatient. They wanted results now, and the damage was so deep, no fix was fast enough. He also faced a brutal media environment. Every decision was magnified, twisted, and debated around the clock. Right-wing pundits called him a socialist, a radical, a foreigner. Conspiracy theories flooded the internet. Birther lies spread, insisting he wasn't born in America. It was ugly, personal, and yet he stayed calm. Rarely lashed out. He often said, "When they go low, we go high," a line Michelle would later echo to thunderous applause. But living that philosophy wasn't easy. Obama also had to prove he could lead on the world stage. His first months in office saw a whirlwind of diplomacy, visits to Europe, Asia, the Middle East. He gave speeches not just as a commander-in-chief, but as a thinker. In Cairo, he called for a new beginning between America and Muslims around the world. In Prague, he spoke of a world without nuclear weapons. His words reached millions, but he knew words alone wouldn't be enough. Then came the fight for health care. It was one of his biggest promises during the campaign, to fix America's broken system. Tens of millions were uninsured. Costs were sky high, and no president had succeeded at reforming it in decades. The battle was brutal. Town halls turned into shouting matches. Protesters screamed about death panels. Lawmakers received threats. Even Democrats were divided. But Barack kept pushing. He met with doctors, patients, senators. He compromised, adjusted, explained. Finally, in March 2010, he signed the Affordable Care Act into law. Obamacare, as critics dubbed it, meant to mock it, became one of the most significant pieces of legislation in modern history. It wasn't perfect. but it expanded coverage to over 20 million people, banned insurance discrimination for pre-existing conditions, and changed the system forever. He paid a price for it, though. The 2010 midterms hit hard. Republicans surged, fueled by the Tea Party movement, angry, organized, and determined to block Obama at every turn. They took control of the House of Representatives. Gridlock became the new norm. No matter what he proposed, jobs bills, immigration reform, gun control, he faced a wall of resistance. Some of it was political, some of it was racial, all of it was exhausting. And yet, he never exploded, never quit. He leaned on his inner circle, Michelle, his trusted advisors, his daughters, his daily workouts, even his jokes. Behind the scenes, he had moments of frustration, of course, but to the world, he stayed steady. In the midst of it all, he made a historic decision to authorize the mission that would kill Osama bin Laden. For years, the world's most wanted terrorist had escaped capture. Under Obama's leadership, the CIA located him in Pakistan. The choice to send in Navy SEALs was risky. If it failed, it could ruin his presidency. But Obama chose action. On May 2, 2011, SEAL Team 6 completed the mission. Bin Laden was dead. That night, Barack walked to the podium in the White House and said calmly, "Justice has been done. No theatrics, no chest thumping. Just a clear, quiet moment that sealed a promise. Even his critics had to pause. For a moment, the nation stood together. But unity was always short-lived. The economic recovery was slow. The wars dragged on. Racial tension grew, sparked by police killings and protests. Barack addressed the issues with honesty, calling for reform and understanding. But progress was slow, resistance strong. Through it all, he remained the same man who once walked Chicago streets as an organizer, calm, careful, steady. But now, every word he spoke moved markets. Every pause mattered. He was in the middle of the storm every day. And still, he never let the storm change who he was. By the time Barack Obama entered his second term in 2013, he already had the battle scars of a man who'd seen what hope was really up against. The cheers from that first inauguration had long faded. The economy was mending, but slowly. Washington was more divided than ever, and the question wasn't just what he could do next. It was whether the country would let him. The second term of a presidency is often when vision meets limits. Barack began with ambition. He wanted immigration reform, stronger climate action, gun control, better schools. But standing in his way was a House of Representatives still controlled by Republicans, many of whom had made it their mission to block anything with Obama's name on it, whether it helped people or not. Still, he pressed on. Right after the 2012 election, Obama pushed for stricter gun laws in the wake of the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting. 20 children and 6 teachers had been murdered in cold blood. The nation wept. Barack stood at the podium with tears in his eyes. He spoke not as a politician, but as a father. And then he pushed for background checks and assault weapon bans. It failed. Despite public support, the bill died in the Senate. It was one of the most bitter moments of his presidency. "Shame on us," he said quietly after the vote. But even in defeat, he didn't turn bitter. He stayed composed, even when heartbroken. On the global front, Obama made bold moves. In 2015, he signed the Iran nuclear deal, a major diplomatic breakthrough that limited Iran's ability to build nuclear weapons in exchange for lifted sanctions. Critics howled, but it was a rare moment of international compromise. He also worked to restore relations with Cuba, reopening embassies, easing restrictions, and even visiting Havana, becoming the first sitting U.S. president to do so in nearly 90 years. His biggest victory in the second term came from an unlikely place: the Supreme Court. In June 2015, the court ruled in favor of same-sex marriage nationwide. Though Obama hadn't always supported it early in his career, he had evolved publicly and gracefully. That night, the White House glowed in rainbow lights. People cheered, cried, danced outside. And Barack, ever the wordsmith, said simply, "Love is love." But every step forward seemed to be matched by fresh storms. The country was changing fast, and not everyone liked it. Social media was exploding, giving rise to conspiracy theories and political extremes. The Tea Party hardened into something more intense. Racial division flared again and again, from Ferguson to Baltimore to Minneapolis. Obama often spoke after such tragedies, not as a man with all the answers, but as someone trying to hold the country together. He talked about the need for police reform, the pain of Black communities, and the importance of empathy. But progress was slow. The anger didn't always listen. Then came the rise of Donald Trump. At first, it seemed like a sideshow, a reality TV star turned political firebrand, pushing the birther lie that Obama wasn't American. It was offensive, but also strategic. Trump knew how to get attention, and in time, the crowds grew. The anger grew. The country began to fracture even more deeply. Obama stayed mostly above it. He didn't take the bait. He kept doing his job, negotiating trade deals, managing foreign crises, issuing executive orders when Congress refused to act. But the noise was getting louder. The dignity he brought to the office was being drowned out by a wave of resentment and chaos. Through all of this, Barack never stopped being Barack. He read letters from ordinary Americans every night, 10 of them, hand-picked. He responded to some. The good ones made him smile. The heartbreaking ones reminded him why he was still trying. He was still a dad, too. He talked openly about the challenge of raising 2 girls in the White House, of keeping them grounded, of trying to give them something close to a normal life. Sasha and Malia grew up in front of the world, but Barack and Michelle shielded them as best they could. And his marriage? It survived the storm. More than survived. It became something rare, a true partnership under unrelenting pressure. They had moments of strain, of course, but they always found their way back. Michelle remained his strongest voice of reason, his closest friend, and his equal in every way. In 2016, the end was near. He couldn't run again. He campaigned hard for Hillary Clinton, warning the country that Donald Trump was not a joke, not a harmless outsider, but a danger to democracy. But the country didn't listen. When Trump won, Barack didn't rage. He didn't panic. He welcomed him to the White House, smiled for the cameras, and showed the kind of grace the office demands, even when the moment didn't deserve it. Behind the scenes, he was worried, not just about Trump, but about what the election said about the country, the divisions, the anger, the willingness to believe lies over facts, fear over hope. He gave his farewell address in Chicago, not Washington. It was emotional, proud, and honest. "If you're tired of arguing with strangers on the internet," he said, "try talking with one of them in real life." He urged people to stay engaged, not to give up, to hold on to that thing he'd believed in all along: hope. He finished with tears in his eyes, thanking Michelle, his daughters, Joe Biden, and the American people. Then he walked off that stage, not as a president, but as a man who had done something. When Barack Obama left the White House in January 2017, he didn't slam the door. He walked out with quiet pride, handed over the keys, and stepped into the crisp Washington air with Michelle's hand in his. The weight of 8 long years had left lines on his face, gray in his hair, and a calm deeper than before. He had been the most powerful man in the world, but now he was something else. A private citizen, a father full-time, a husband without the Oval Office between them, and a former president watching history bend in directions he couldn't control. The country he left behind felt more divided than ever. Donald Trump had taken office on a wave of anger and distrust, promising to undo almost everything Obama had built. And he did try, rolling back climate protections, leaving international agreements, fighting to repeal the Affordable Care Act. Barack stayed mostly silent at first. There's an unspoken rule among former presidents: don't criticize your successor publicly. But inside, he watched with concern. So he pivoted. Instead of fighting daily battles with the new administration, he looked long-term. He started the Obama Foundation, focused on leadership, activism, and giving young people the tools to make change from the ground up. He believed that the next great chapter of American democracy wasn't going to come from Washington. It was going to come from classrooms, protests, voting booths, and local neighborhoods. He gave speeches again, thoughtful, measured, careful not to spark division, but to remind the country of what it could be. When Charlottesville happened and white supremacists marched openly, Barack responded with a tweet quoting Nelson Mandela. "No one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin." It became the most liked tweet in history. Even in silence, his words echoed. But Obama also had space now to live, to breathe. He and Michelle signed a massive book deal. They partnered with Netflix to create content that told deeper American stories. They traveled. They went on walks without Secret Service close enough to step on their heels. He played basketball again. He sat by the ocean. He smiled more. Michelle released her memoir, Becoming, in 2018. It was raw and beautiful and sold millions. Barack followed with A Promised Land, the first volume of his own memoirs. In it, he shared the weight of leadership, the pain of compromise, and the quiet joy of being someone trying, just trying, to do good. And even with the spotlight dimmed, his influence stayed bright. He supported Democratic candidates in midterm elections. He campaigned with passion, especially when the stakes felt high, when democracy itself seemed to wobble. He didn't yell. He didn't insult. He reminded. Then came the pandemic. COVID-19 ripped through the world. The United States was hit hard. Misinformation spread faster than the virus. Leaders clashed. People died by the thousands. And Obama, once again, spoke with reason. He urged Americans to listen to science, to take care of one another. He mourned the loss with them, quietly, respectfully. 2020 brought more than just a virus. It brought fire. After the killing of George Floyd, protests erupted in every corner of the country. Black Lives Matter signs filled the streets. Obama didn't rush to the front, but his voice was clear. This country was founded on protest. It's called the American Revolution. He called for reform, accountability, and real change, but also reminded people that anger must be channeled into action. Vote, he said, again and again. And they did. Joe Biden, his old friend and former vice president, ran for president. The campaign was framed not just as a political contest, but a battle for the soul of the nation. Obama hit the campaign trail, more fired up than he had been in years. He called out lies. He defended decency. He reminded America of who it had been and who it could still be. Biden won. Trump refused to concede. The Capitol was stormed on January 6, 2021. Barack watched with the rest of us, heartbroken but unsurprised. We'd be kidding ourselves, he later said, if we didn't see this coming. The seeds of division, of denial, of hate, they had been watered for years. Yet even then, he stayed grounded in hope. Not naive, but deliberate. He and Michelle continued their work, building leaders, telling stories, creating space for ideas to grow. They weren't trying to be America's royal family. They were just trying to be useful, present, ready. He never called himself perfect, never claimed to fix it all. He made mistakes, admitted them. Sometimes he moved too cautiously. Sometimes he compromised too quickly. But he never forgot who he was or who he worked for. His presidency didn't end the fight for justice. It didn't end racism or division or poverty. But it changed what was possible. It showed a generation that the impossible was only impossible until it wasn't. When asked how he stayed so calm through it all, Obama once said, "I don't get too high. I don't get too low. I try to stay level." And maybe that's it. In a world that spins wildly, Barack Obama didn't try to control the spin. He just stood steady, spoke clearly, moved forward, always forward.